When a game launches to peak critical acclaim, there is a tension in following it up. You have to take a much deeper look at where the room for improvement lies. While waiting for a sequel to something in today's development timelines, you're often given half a decade plus to dive into what exactly made a game so individual. In that time, technology is always going to improve. The game you are waiting for has a probable chance to end up on hardware that has yet to be announced. As a result, a great deal of the innovation in sequels comes by way of access to more power. However, in certain instances that isn't the case. The most groundbreaking innovation will come from a deeper understanding of power. Breath of the Wild was developed as a Wii U game, and within the limitations of Wii U's power. Tears of the Kingdom has been developed and optimized to run exclusively on the Switch, providing much more opportunity to take things the extra mile. Nintendo has an increase of power and a much better understanding of the Switch's hardware at their disposal this time. The games that are viewed in such high regard but still have obvious room for improvement are the most exciting to pay attention to. Breath of the Wild was considered by many the best its genre had to offer. Accolades aside, there was still plenty to add or improve on. This is what makes anticipation for what Nintendo will have done with Tears of the Kingdom so palpable. Having to attempt to surpass a game that did almost everything right is a tall order. Breath of the Wild was in most ways a big pivot for the franchise. It still had all the makings of what makes a Legend of Zelda game special, but the way in which you experience those parts is very different from what it once was. Taking the game into such a large world required changing some aspects of what you've grown used to over decades of an evolving formula. Beyond whatever new mechanics Nintendo have been able to come up with in the last 6 years, there are still parts of Zelda that have yet to be explored in this new format. The addition of them makes it far easier to convince the masses they're capable of changing the genre once again, and having history repeat itself come May 12th. Dungeons in most mainline Zelda games are a very important part of their pacing, both in gameplay changes via acquired items and making the overall gameplay loop as diverse as possible. In a game that is fully open versus only partially, the player creates their own pace. As such, Breath of the Wild shrines were made as a substitute. You get your break from open world exploration in much smaller doses, but those doses arrive very often. Due to Breath of the Wild's gameplay systems, you have opportunities to approach completing shrines in many ways, whereas past dungeons were progressed through in a mostly linear fashion. They were a great choice in the game's new formula, but dungeons as they were known in every other mainline game were lost in the process. The Divine Beasts acted as the larger dungeons in the game, and while puzzle-wise they were very sound, it's a lack of aesthetic change that makes all the difference. When you go through dungeons in other Zelda games, they feel so unique as a result of the biome they exist within. Nintendo opted for the same visual design for 120 shrines and 4 dungeons. When you change the entire environment dungeon to dungeon, it allows for immense diversity in enemy types and boss encounters. You are given all the tools you need in the opening hours of the game. While there were intended ways to beat shrines and dungeons, Nintendo didn't stop you from doing it your own way. The varied amount of ways to complete these made up for the visual similarities between them all, but in Tears of the Kingdom, they won't fare as well unless they expand this area of the game. While scaling up many areas of the game is a given, there is one area that some believe could be scaled back. Breakable weapons were the biggest contention point in Breath of the Wild's overall design. In many ways, the integration of the past Zelda's weapon implementation has potential to hurt Tears of the Kingdom more than it does elevate it. A large part of Breath of the Wild's brilliance was how Nintendo used its physics engine. The way in which you're able to use a vast number of weapons in combination with the world's environment is another reason exploring the map is so enticing. The elements play a role in everything. The makings of each weapon create many more use cases than just combat. Everything from puzzles to traversal takes a hit if weapon durability ceases to exist. It forces you to constantly get creative in how you overcome challenges. In this version of The Legend of Zelda, giving the player only 4 or 5 permanent weapons to switch between waters down the experience of finding those unique ways to approach situations. When you talk to others that played Breath of the Wild, you found that the way everyone completed a task can be a vastly different experience. That is in large part to everyone's inventory looking vastly different depending on what parts of the game they wandered into first. Removing this experience changes the conversation from what approach did you take to how long did it take you to do the exact same thing I did. Removing weapon durability sounds really compelling on paper, but would not translate well to the moment-to-moment of Tears of the Kingdom. It would dilute what makes it special. I'm sure there's a way it could be done, but going back to what it once was is not the answer in this format. It's a monumentally important part of the individual player's narrative in the game. If those moments cease to exist, what does the game become? The traditional narrative in Breath of the Wild was not its focus. It leaned into gameplay above all else, which it should. It worked wonderfully, but the opportunity to double down on character storytelling is now. Since Tears of the Kingdom's first teaser in 2019, the marketing has felt like it's leaning into these aspects of the game. The darker tone on display is exactly the direction needed to make the sequel stand on its own. It's very much reminiscent of the tonal changes that came with Majora's Mask post Ocarina of Time. There is, however, one aspect of The Legend of Zelda that always seems to raise the stakes both emotionally and tonally. There is something about the final threat being human Ganondorf that has always brought a sense of foreboding to the entire games he is included in. Every time he is the chosen threat, the entire world has an eerie feeling to it. Even in the game's most animated art style in The Wind Waker, he was somehow still used effectively. Breath of the Wild had a lot of space to work with. The final battle against Dark Beast Ganon was only sufficient. Ganondorf in Gerudo form comes with a feeling very reminiscent of Final Fantasy Sephiroth. While they haven't quite been able to reach those heights, Tears of the Kingdom feels like it's setting the stage for the most formidable version of him yet. With added VA that sounds like it's performed by Matt Mercer, this remains a large part of the game that, if executed on correctly, could be monumental for The Legend of Zelda. Tears of the Kingdom has so much to live up to. While it will no doubt achieve again what Nintendo was able to do in the way of world design and creative gameplay, there are still plenty of things to improve upon outside of that mastery. And if they've accounted for them, then history just might repeat itself.